Morning, everyone. I'm Anita Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and thank you for virtually attending this morning's town hall on managing an unexpected remote workforce. Still at this time, it's important to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. We thank the Port of Vancouver for the sponsorship of the Surrey Digital Town Hall, and a great shout out to our frontline workers. Really, the port trades with more than 170 world economies, with nearly 95% of port activity focused on Canadian import and export markets. The frontline workers are marine pilots, terminal workers, truck drivers, and railroaders ensure that our supply chain continues not only in British Columbia, but in Canada. So thank you again to the Port of Vancouver for your sponsorship. Just a couple of instructions before we begin. The session is being recorded. The link will be sent to you after the session for you to share, and there will be a survey link as well. All attendees are muted. I ask you to please type out your questions only in the chat function. We will get to your questions after all of the questions that we have prepared for the panelists are over. If we are unable to respond to your questions during this session, we will get back to you after the session. I wanted to also let you know that the Surrey Board of Trade in itself, as a not-for-profit organization, is ensuring that we are invoking ground zero principles, contacting all of our members and the business community to ensure that they know of and have the support that they need during pandemic times. I sit on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. We participate on weekly calls with the City of Surrey, and we are on daily calls through the federal government and have a direct line into the Prime Minister's office to ensure that we are in an ongoing way addressing gaps and opportunities for supports to business, not only during the pandemic, but also post-pandemic. And I wanted to assure you that the Surrey Board of Trade continues to thrive. I haven't had to lay off any of my staff. We're all working remotely and as busy as ever to ensure that Surrey remains an opportunity city. We will be the largest city in British Columbia, and my staff, my team will ensure that we are there for you. So let's get right to introducing our panelists. First, Laura Benson. Laura is BC's lead for PwC's Global People and Organization Practice, a team of 10,000 change management, cultural transformation, talent development, organizational strategy, and HR analytic professionals. Just a wealth of experience, over 15 years of consulting. So thank you, Laura, for joining us this morning. Next, we have Michael Anhorn. Michael has spent over 20 years working in the not-for-profit sector, and for the last 7 years, he has led the Canadian Mental Health Association's Vancouver-Fraser branch as their executive director. He has significant experience in disaster response, change management, not-for-profit governance, leadership development, government relations, and so on. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. And finally, we have Ryan Wozniak. Ryan is the Senior Vice President of Operations and Legal at Peninsula Human Resources, a trusted team of HR advisors providing a direct solution to employee management and employment advice. Prior to joining Peninsula in 2018, Ryan actively practiced employment law and commercial litigation for 12 years in Toronto. So ladies and gentlemen, you have a wealth of experience joining us for the next hour, really focused on how to manage your remote workforce. So we've been getting a lot of questions ever since the pandemic was issued as a global health pandemic by the World Health Organization. daily, hourly, we receive so many calls for support. So we've just identified our top 10 questions, which I'll go through in response to each of the panelists. So just a reminder again to the attendees to please indicate your questions that you have in the chat function, and we will get to them afterwards. So my first question is to all three of you, actually, and Laura, we'll begin with you. You know, we pivoted to a remote workforce, even in post-pandemic times, until a vaccine is found. A remote workforce, to some extent, is still a reality. What should leaders and managers, from your perspective, consider? Laura, let's begin with you.
Yeah, I think thank you very much. Just letting you know that I'm on the phone because I actually live in a remote area of BC. So, and the internet doesn't seem to be cooperating today. So thank you for allowing me to join by phone. I think for employees, the most important thing is the concept of be well to work well, especially under COVID. You know, we have addressed a lot through the media and through regulation about feeling physically safe, but there's also a psychological safety that sometimes isn't being addressed as much as the physical safety. So I think what's important as a leader is considering how you will address the psychological safety of your team. I think that's especially important. Another thing that I do as a leader is I'm really looking at my ability to lead remotely. You know, we do a lot of remote work at PwC, but it's now at the next level. And so, you know, there's some virtual habits that I'm trying to develop. You know, I've got some good tips for collaboration. I also need to develop in my leading of remote teams, and that's a recommendation that I give to most leaders. There's also a way to create an optimal culture in a remote world, and it takes new skills to do that as well as a leader. And also coaching remotely has a different nuance than it does face-to-face. So you don't have all the indicators that you do in a 3D environment as you do in a 2D environment. So that really takes some consideration. So my two recommendations, from the two considerations I think they're most important, are looking not only considering that your employees they can be well to work, they need to be well to work well. So both their physical and psychological safety, and also continually striving to develop your abilities to lead remotely as a leader.
Ryan, what's your perspective?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. And my perspective from an HR side are that there are really three main themes that emerge from the remote working phenomenon, I'll call it, because I think this has been very sudden for a lot of businesses. And those three themes are number one, still managing your day-to-day expectations with your staff from beyond. And as my colleague alluded to a moment ago, there are some very unique challenges for managing staff remotely. And if we were in the office, we'd say, okay, well, what are your normal hours of work? When are your rest times? There are policies that most employers have in place governing absence management or tardiness or productivity. So how do we manage those everyday expectations when we're not in the office? And we've been assisting our clients develop telecommuting policies that set out protocols for checking in with staff to see how, number one, to see how they're doing, but to see how their productivity is and how they're finding how they're finding working from home and any inhibitors to their productivity and their daily schedules, especially if they have children. Many people working from home have contracts of employment already that have perhaps certain defined expectations or requirements, and are they able to meet those working remotely? Is it fair, and how do you adjust those terms to make working remotely viable? The second big theme is health and safety. the most obvious issue is workspace. Not every employee has a functional home working space. And that raises issues of ergonomics, of, in some instances, mental and physical health. You don't want someone working, for example, in a furnace room or a bathroom for prolonged periods of time, which then opens the door to questions about workplace safety. If the home is the working space in which your staff are operating, then that becomes an extension of the workplace. And most employers arguably still have a statutory obligation to ensure their workers' safety. And there could be issues of harassment as well. People are still communicating with clients and with each other, and things do happen, especially in a digital environment. And finally, accommodation issues. People are working at home with children, and it's very, very difficult. Or they might have elderly dependents that now they can't care for, they're trying to care for. So, but what if a worker says, I can't get done my normal tasks because I've got kids at home? How do you employ your accommodation process to deal with that? And sickness issues, finally. If we're working from home, what's an absence? And how do you fit that into your existing regime for managing employee illness? So it really causes us to re-examine the matrix of HR in what is clearly an unprecedented situation.
Definitely challenging questions that every leader needs to respond to. But from a mental health perspective, Michael, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to consider is how different people's routines are. So when we're working from the office, we have a set routine in the morning, we have our commute to work. Usually we've got some routines through the day that help keep us well, that we can rely on and expect to happen. All of that's been thrown up in the air with working from home. And so taking some time to help employees think about what's their new routine. So that, because as humans, we really like routine. Our bodies like it and our brains like it. Even those of us who love change, on some level, we still need some predictability in our day. So taking just some time with your employees, especially ones that might be struggling, to help them think through what routine will work for them. It's not probably what we would normally do, but as has become a cliche, these are anything but normal times. And so any support we can give to our employees to reestablish some kind of routine that works for them, keeping in mind that what works for you may or may not work for them. So it's important to support them to come up with their routine rather than trying to say, here's what will work. And I do think that's a really big one. It'll help both if there's other members in the house, it helps with them to know, have the expectations of what's going to happen when, but also for the employee themselves. And then I think the other thing is to not underestimate the impact of how much news is coming at us. You know, I know for myself, I've had to limit how often I watch the news and engage in social media because I was feeling my anxiety creep up every time I heard something new. And to just kind of be aware of that and help your employees to become aware of that and help them find ways to respond that are helpful for them. Again, remembering what's helpful for us may or may not be helpful for the other person. What's important is them finding out what's helpful for them.
And you know, my next question was pivoted towards Laura and Brian, but Michael, you may have a response to this after as well. But one of the challenges, as you all indicated, is how do you keep your remote workers in sync, motivated, ensuring that their work plans are achieved? What are some tips and strategies that you can offer? So Laura, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I don't know if people have seen this TED Talk, but one of my favorite speakers is Margaret Heffernan, and she gives a talk about super chickens. And the premise of her talk is that it's not hiring the most star performers that motivates your teams. It's actually social cohesion that builds a strong team. So you can have average people outperform superstars as long as there's social cohesion. So I think that the way that we keep our teams motivated is continuing that social cohesion. And one of the ways we achieve it at PwC is we solve problems, and solving problems or motivating teams to a common goal has been really motivating for all of us, because we're really focused on supporting our clients through COVID. So that has enabled our motivation, that has built our teams. So my recommendation would be, you know, how do you keep remote workers in sync, and how do you keep them motivated, is to give them a common goal and then give them the tools and provide and the opportunities to socialize around that goal and commonly aim to achieve it.
Okay, thank you very much. Ryan.
Yeah, I think our strategy, and I don't want to speak for everybody, one of the strategies that we've used in our own business to try and engender cohesion, social cohesion, and camaraderie at a time when we're all separate and apart, is communication. Communication squared. We've really emphasized regular communication with our staff, our team leaders and our managers, reaching out to their teams every day with regular check-in calls or regular video conferences, just to see how everyone's doing, to make sure we're managing our expectations effectively and comfortably, that people have an open forum in which to share any concerns that they may have or challenges that they're encountering. And we also try to introduce fun. It's not always possible, especially with people who have families and commitments who are really scrambling to keep up. But we try to, for example, our team has a trivia night on Fridays. People who participate can come and have coffee or wine. Okay, and we do trivia. Some individuals have set up a poker night, a virtual poker night, and little things like that. It sounds so obvious, but little things like that make such a huge difference when people can at least have some semblance of normalcy and feel like, yeah, even though we're apart, we still have this community of friends at work, and we're able to speak to one another outside of the context of these formal meetings where we kind of feel like we might be scrutinized. And that's worked really effectively. And every workplace is different, but stuff like that I find is really good at keeping people on the same page or running in the same direction.
Michael, your perspective.
So I would agree with everything that's been said so far. We've really upped the amount of communication and the number of meetings. The other thing I would say is, and the fun, some of our team leads are dressing up for every team meeting. And so we've had unicorns, and I can't even tell you all of what we've had, but so we incorporating it into regular meetings as well. You know, maybe as a nonprofit, we can get away with a little more of that. But I think even, you know, I've worked in the public sector and the private, and even incorporating fun into regular meetings can help. The other thing I would say is we start every meeting, or almost every meeting, with a personal check-in, with the very simple question of, how are you today? And we take some time to listen. And what I find that helps people know that others care about them in their workplace, it helps replace some of the, you know, kitchen conversations or the hallway conversations that would happen. And it only takes 5 to 10 minutes. So we don't necessarily have to spend a long time on it. And we don't do it with the view of fixing anything. We just do it with the view of hearing how each of our team members is doing. You know, in some of the circles I travel, they talk about trust, that you need to trust the other person can handle what's going on with them, and that they'll ask for help if they need it. Now, I think in this context, if you see someone struggling in that check-in, a follow-up call or video chat is really helpful, just to make sure that they've got the supports that they need, and if not, to give them some referrals. But like I said, just taking some time at the beginning to ask that really quite simple question of, how are you doing today? And making a space where it's okay to not be okay. This is a crisis response, a disaster response, and all of us are going to go through roller coasters of emotions, and to just let that be, and make some time for it.
So Michael, I'm curious to know that, you know, working remotely for many is something that we're not used to. I mean, even leaders and managers, they're going through a lot of anxiety, so they have to take care of their staff, but they're unable to share what they're going through. So really, from both a workforce and management perspective, what mental health considerations should there be?
So like I said at the beginning, routine is really important, making sure that there's some time to think through what are the new routines. I think it's really important to recognize that we're not in normal times. We are I would say right now, we're probably in a disaster response, which is a time when we just work to mitigate the damage, keep things as stable as possible, and hopefully don't do more damage in mitigating the damage. At some point soon, we'll move into disaster recovery, and that's where we get to make some choices about how we want to be going forward. And to recognize that not everyone will move through those phases at the same time. So some people will still feel a high level of threat, while others are looking to the future and going, okay, what do we do to go forward? What do we need to do? What do we want to do? Who do we want to be in this new world? And as a leader, to kind of hold space and to be okay with people being in those different positions. I think the other thing for me is around the importance of vulnerability. So as leaders, we don't always get to share all of our emotions, but to show that you're struggling as well when you are is really important in these times. And that's not to say that the answer comes from your team or that all the support comes from your team, but if they know that you as an individual are having ups and downs, it helps give permission for them to be honest about their ups and downs. And so I think that's a really important piece of leadership in this time. And again, for some leaders, that's very natural. For others, it may be uncomfortable. But taking that risk, I think, will see people connect better. And connection is such a huge part of our mental health. We know that if we feel alone, whether we're physically alone or not, but if we feel alone, our mental health suffers. So everything we can do to build that connection and build a sense of we're in this together, as we've heard so often, is vitally important. I think the other thing is a reminder to be really gentle with yourself through these times. Not every day will be as productive as we would normally be. And we need to be okay with that. We need to find a way to say, instead of beating myself up for not getting everything done that I said I would or that I was expected to be like, okay, these are not normal times. I'm doing my best. And then also extending that to your teammates, right? To your team members, to be as gentle with them as possible, knowing work still needs to get done. And so there are accountabilities, and it's just maybe how we coach through them can change a little bit during these times. Maybe we can look for how to be the most flexible possible, and how, like I said, to take time to really ask that question, whether it's in team meetings or one-on-one, how are you doing today? The other thing that struck me through this is to remember that now that we're all on video calls and most of us are working from home, really in a lot of ways, we're being invited into our team members' homes. And to remember that, right? It's not often that you invite your boss over to be in your living room or your second bedroom or wherever your office is set up. But that's what's happening every day now. And so to remember that in some ways we're a guest in their house, and to acknowledge that there's going to be interruptions we didn't expect, and maybe that the person is embarrassed by. I have a dog. Sometimes he loves to yell really loudly. I get embarrassed by that when I'm in a serious business meeting. My team has reminded me that I'm at home and that, of course, my dog's going to bark from time to time. That's what dogs do. For people who have kids, the kids come and pop up in the video. It's still novel for them. And we can choose to either be really annoyed by that or to take it as a moment of recognizing that we're a guest in their home and getting to know them a little bit better. Maybe saying hello to the kid or laughing about the loudness of the dog or the cat that jumps up suddenly and blocks the camera. And just roll with it and make it as okay for the other person as possible.
I'm just going to move on to the next question, actually, because when we're talking about wanting to be a perfectionist, and I always want to be a perfectionist, but what tools allow workers to successfully work remotely during these pandemic times? So Laura, we'll go to you first, and then Ryan.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to start by saying, you know, what Michael and Ryan said about working remotely really resonated with me. You know, my dog is often barking, and in fact, he may bark because we're expecting a delivery any moment now. So excuse me if that happens. Also, to the whole concept of psychological well-being that they touched on, I can't emphasize enough. I think it's very, very important. But turning to the topic of tools, you know, there's the obvious ones, which is technology. So, you know, having the ability to connect with teams. We are all really encouraged to turn our cameras on, and so that's a very important tool. And there's also, again, psychological safety that goes, there are my dogs. We're also psychological safety that goes around turning your camera on, you know, and a lot of that I can relate to as a woman. For the last little while, a lot of people have seen me on camera with no makeup, and I've had to learn to be okay with that. And I'm, you know, quite happy in how I've grown in that acceptance of myself. So that's a tool, is the camera. Setting clear standards for teams. I don't know if any of you have teams that work across time zones, but setting clear standards, because now there is very little separation from home and work. And so it's very easy, for example, for my teammates in Toronto to set a meeting accidentally that's at 5 a.m. my time. And so a tool that has served us very well is setting clear service standards and clear rules around time zones. Also, to having the ability to do some kind of group chat. We really embraced Google Chats. And so it's just an opportunity when you're not connected on the phone or by camera, if you want to share something with a teammate or you have an idea, and perhaps it's even outside of those working hours, having Google Chat rooms for teams I've actually really loved it. I joined, speaking of pets, I joined the PwC Google Chat room for people who have pets. And it's been a real good way for me, a really good tool and a way for me to connect with my peers. And also too, another tool has been daily stand-up meetings. So going back to that idea of social cohesion, and the idea that common goals can motivate social cohesion and drive social cohesion, we actually start for the priority work we have. We start every day with a daily team stand-up, and that clearly defines who's available today, who might have personal stuff going on that day, that their children are sick, or often a lot of our people have parents that live at home with them now, elderly parents, perhaps they have to tend to their elderly parents. So that daily stand-up really helps us level set what we can accomplish in that day. And so that's been a very useful tool for us now as well. So that's what I would recommend.
Ryan, you're next.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have covered off most of what I think are the key points. I would add only a couple of more. I touched upon this earlier. Health and safety and working facilities at home. For people to be productive, they need the equipment and environment in which to be productive. And I think it's often overlooked and underestimated, but it is, I think, it has been for our business a significant challenge at times, but we've overcome it, I think, very well, especially with a robust IT team. But I think beyond the actual operational issues, I would highlight actually two more things that I think are important. One, setting realistic goals for yourself. I think if you come in working from home and you get up every day and say, well, I'm going to accomplish 10 or 15 things, that you may have been able to accomplish in an office environment or outside of the working from home environment, you're probably setting yourself up for failure, and you'll get frustrated and feel like you're not getting anywhere. And I've been guilty of that, and as has my team, but we've gotten better at that, and I think it's made a difference in terms of setting realistic goals and mental health. And on that note, I would add one more point, which is mental fortitude. And I think it's very easy to fall victim to our circumstances. And Michael made a good point about giving yourself a break or cutting yourself some slack. And I think that you should relish your vulnerability. And vulnerability can be a petri dish for growth. It exposes your greatest strengths and sometimes your greatest weaknesses. And necessity is the mother of invention. And it's sometimes a great opportunity to reevaluate how you do things and take solace in that. And be confident in your ability to reinvent yourself, to tackle these challenges with a positive mindset, not let cognitive distortion weigh you down. And I think finally, if you don't do that, I think mental health could be a canary in a coal mine with this working from home reality that we're facing. If we're not careful with it, people are feeling increasingly stressed and depressed and overwhelmed. And it's very critical that you set realistic goals and realistic work and mental goals for yourself to stay healthy.
Ryan, what are the biggest benefits and weaknesses from your perspective on working remotely, knowing that we're going to have to work remotely even when the economy opens up? Should there be some type of a checklist that's appropriate instead of the employer, working, or the employee working from home? Like, what are your suggestions?
That's an interesting question. When I saw this one, I sort of had to think about it for a second, and because right now everyone's focusing on the drawbacks, really. And in terms of the benefits, the one, I'll give you some anecdotal evidence. One of the most formidable benefits that our business has encountered is I don't want to say the exploitation, the harvesting of technology. This epidemic or pandemic, and this phenomenon of working from home has really caused our business to take advantage of technology and use it to generate greater social cohesion, and in some instances even greater productivity, and really realizing the full potential of technology. So I think it's causing a lot of businesses to look inward and say, wow, and I didn't realize technology could do all this for us. And maybe we could even use these tools when we're back in the office, or we're in some hybrid mode of people working from home and people being physically present. And that, for me, was an eye-opener. I mean, I'd like to think of myself as being reasonably tech-savvy, but I didn't realize just how extensive the tools are that are available to businesses. I guess in terms of, part of me wants to say in some instances, technology and working from home can enhance someone's productivity because you have sometimes more alone time, and people randomly walking into your office, fire alarms, you don't have commuting delays. So in some respects you have more productivity, but I guess that also depends on whether you have children at home or pets at home or technological issues at home that could negate those potential benefits. And I think we've talked a lot about the disadvantages of working with home in the previous two question sets. So I'll let those answers speak for themselves.
Michael, what difference in leadership and crisis response is needed in pandemic times versus normal times?
Yeah, it's a great question, Anita. And one of the biggest things for me is, I think, like in normal times, we almost always have time to assess the situation, gather the information. The information is relatively stable. What's known today is usually known tomorrow. In a crisis or in a disaster response, what's known this minute and what's known 10 minutes from now is often very different. So we're making decisions, the best decisions we can with the information we have in this moment. In normal times, it's not in this moment, it's in a much longer time frame. And so one of the things that's needed is a willingness and ability to reassess your decisions and your team's decisions as new information comes to light. There needs to be an embracing of knowing that we don't know and being okay to say, I don't know that right now, or we don't know that. In the early days of the pandemic, we weren't sure all of the vectors of transmission. Now, we've got a much better sense of that, so we can make better decisions. And it's not that the decisions we made in January were wrong. They were the best decisions available with the information that was available. Decisions we're making today are the best decisions we can make with the information we have available. And so I think really embracing that need to make decisions with not full information and then reassess and reassess and reassess. Huge part of what's needed in leadership during a crisis. I think the need to express vulnerability goes up in a crisis, so that people know that you're in this with them and that you're struggling as well and that you're having successes as well. So it's not just about the hardship, but also what's going well. And then I think also in leadership in a crisis, knowing that old ways of doing things won't necessarily work. So the things that worked in December and January may or may not work the same way now. So the cause and effect relationship for some things will have been exploded and pulled apart. And so that then leads us into experimenting with, okay, well, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's try this. To reestablish those cause and effect relationships. And I think in leadership, especially in a workplace setting, is recognizing that paying attention to mental health, I think it's always important. And I think increasingly the data and the evidence shows that. But in these times, it's even more important.
Technology. So Laura, we'll begin with you, and a question to all of you is, how do you create a communication strategy during these times?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, the creation of an effective communication strategy, what's really important is that it's based on common needs, right? So not just, often communication strategies can be seen as marketing campaigns or a dissemination of information. The best communication strategies not only disseminate information, but they also absorb information from the people and gather their input as well. So I would suggest that, it's based on common needs, yes, but that it's also two-way communication. So I really am, the concept of vulnerability that's being threaded through our conversation today really resonates with me, because, for people to, within your strategy, make room for them to express things like vulnerability is very important. So that's an important concept in creating an effective strategy. The strategy needs to be able to pivot and be iterative. People might start with needing a lot of communication, a lot of comfort. It may ebb and flow for some time. There may be periods where they feel over communicated to. So it's important to have some kind of measure. We often use quick poll everywhere to, are we communicating too much? Are we communicating too little? How is the communication going? We use touch points and technology to iterate and to pivot based on the needs of the target audience, like based on the needs of our team. And then I think another part of an effective communication strategy is that it does anticipate the future. So, a lot of us are shifting our mindset, especially with the flattening of the curve in BC, to, oh my goodness, what is it going to mean when I go back to work? Or how am I going to go back to work? Or, all those kinds of things. So it anticipates the future, but also at the same time, it doesn't ignore the past. So that's a tricky balance, right? You need to acknowledge the past, acknowledge everything that people have been through, but still, it's kind of, for us, it's kind of future focused. so anticipating the future. And then what goes along with that is, you know, we try to keep our communications real. There's nothing worse than feeling like some kind of positive message is being shoved on you or put upon you when you're really feeling vulnerable, or you're feeling, you know, not your best that day. And so balancing the message between, you know, positivity and reality, and making it real and authentic, I think, is another very important part of it.
Brian?
So that would be.
Yeah, I think for fear of doubling over and repeating what my colleagues have said, which I think is totally spot on, I think it's about a communication mindset. Those of you who know Simon Sinek has been talking a lot about having an infinite mindset and a growth mindset and an adaptive mindset in a totally uncertain time. And I just think having a communication mindset where you're communicating but not over communicating, communicating effectively and genuinely at the right times in the right ways is critical. And I was going to talk about telecommuting policies, but you know, given everything that's going on, I'm not sure people are going to be able to sit down and bang out telecommuting policies and fire them off to everybody. Certainly something to put in your back pocket from the time is right, but in the moment, I really think it's that communication mindset is so critical.
I agree. Michael, your perspective on communication.
Yeah, I've been using what one of my staff members helped me name as the 4 Ps of communication in a pandemic. And so the first is predictable. Our team knows when we're going to communicate about COVID-19. And right now we're doing it daily. I think soon we'll start to step that back a bit, but so far it's been daily. It's been at a predictable time of day. We also make the communication personal. So instead of using, you know, terms like the employee, we say you. And instead of the author, we say I. We make it pastoral, which is another way of saying caring. So we demonstrate caring in what we do and in what we communicate, and we make sure it's practical. So we're not communicating high-level theory to our employees at this time. We're talking about things that they can do right now, right here, whether it's in relation to maintaining their mental wellness or doing their duties, you know, their job duties. So that's predictable, personal, pastoral, and practical. And that's what we've used to frame our communication strategy.
Michael, just a question from the audience, because you're there, is what are strategies and suggestions for managing staff who may be experiencing vicarious trauma due to working with clients either impacted by COVID or clients who are experiencing secondary effects from COVID, you know, financial stress, domestic violence? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So one of the things I'd strongly recommend is making sure that you've got in your back pocket a list of resources that you can refer people to. So, you know, I work for the Canadian Mental Health Association. We have a COVID-19 website, cmha.bc.ca/COVID-19. And that lists some resources that are available. There's lots of those resource lists out there. But make sure you've got some things to refer your employees to. As a manager, it's not necessarily your job or your role to fix things, but if you can have some places to refer people to, remind them of the benefits that are available if you have benefits. If there's an employee and family assistance program, remind them that they can reach out to that. I think often as leaders, and this is even more true for male leaders, we think it's our job to fix it, but really our job is to help people get connected to the professional help that's out there. And if nothing else, if you don't know any other resources, refer them to a crisis line. Crisis lines are there to help connect people with resources. And even though almost all of our resources have gone virtual, most of them are still available. So So encouraging your employees to reach out and reminding them that if they're struggling, that is more than enough justification to reach out. Some employees may say, I don't want to reach out because I'm sure they're overstressed and my problem's not that bad. To just say, you know, I don't think we compare suffering. If you're suffering, please reach out. Let me help you. Here's the number, you know, and reach out.
My last question to all of you, and Laura, will begin with you, is we're talking about return to work strategies. So mobilize, stabilize, return to work. What should leaders and staff think about for return to work strategies at this time?
Yeah, it's interesting times when we start to talk about that. The concern is that the panic or the potential chaos that we experienced during the mobilized phase is equal or worse when we return to work. And so we want to avoid that for sure. So it's very important for organizations or for people as individuals to think about your return to work plan. You know, and also to build upon that great communication strategy you've built, to stay connected with your not only your workforce, but authorities, because until we have a vaccine, there might be a bit of bouncing, right? We might go in and realize that we've gone in too quickly and there could be some cases that start to emerge and we have to go back out again. So staying connected with your workforce and staying connected with the authorities and the official announcements is very important. Deciding the logistics of returning, like the things that cross my mind and the things that we've discussed is, will we all go up elevators together? What happens to those Polycom phones that we use in our conference rooms that we all touch? Like, so there's a lot of logistics to consider in your return to work plan. How often will your offices be cleaned? One of the interesting things about our environment is that we're often on the road, and so we hotel into desks, so nobody has a permanent desk. Well, how does that work when we return to work and we're trying to, you know, avoid a rebound of COVID? So that's a consideration as well. So not only defining your work plan and those elements, but also looking at supporting your employees as they transition back to work. So understanding their temporary limitations. So when we return to work, do we bring employees who are immunocompromised back to work immediately? Do we bring certain demographics, perhaps the ones that are most vulnerable to COVID, back to work immediately, or do we let them lag in their return to work? Also to support employees with specific programs. So there may be crises that occur when we return, and I'm not trying to paint a negative picture, but that is reality. And so to be clear with employees, just like the support framework you had when they left and the support framework you have while they're working remotely, what is the support framework and the crisis management tools that you have in place when they return to work? And then there also might be some, if anybody's from the HR department, there's definitely going to be some changes in HR policies. Like, there's a new normal under COVID. And so how does that new normal affect your policies, and how does it affect your people? So that would be my input on that question.
Thank you so much. Ryan, over to you on that.
Yeah, as a lawyer, this one is particularly interesting, and Heather made some very salient points. And I apologize if there's noise in the background. My daughter's trying to build a vaccine out of a shoebox, so I've either got a genius or someone's watched too much TV. But I think, touching or building on Heather's point, this raises so many operational issues. For example, if we have employees on layoff, how do we prioritize their return? Or how do we prioritize any employee's return to the office? Do we start looking at prioritizing people who've not had infections or have been infected or exposed to someone who's been infected? And does that raise discriminatory concerns or run afoul of provincial human rights codes? Are we able to ask returning employees to provide medical evidence or clearance certificates? And how would that work given the current strain on our medical or our health systems, provincial health systems? Mandatory testing, mandatory drug testing, and especially in the unionized environment, has been not exactly tolerated by the higher courts in our country, but is that something that's deemed essential to ensure worker safety? How do we introduce modified HR and health and safety policies to reflect our new reality and in our own cloistered and unique ecosystems in our own businesses? And Google and Apple have been talking about tracking software, and are we able to place limitations on the freedom of movement of our staff and what they do on their free time? So it really is a brave new world, and it sounds like it might be drifting towards a more Orwellian world, but time shall tell. But a really, really interesting discussion.
I think that's over to me. So one of the things, first of all, I think people should be starting to think about this now and starting to plan for it now. As an organization, we were almost 100% in-person services before COVID-19. In a matter of less than 2 weeks, we went to almost 100% virtual supports and services. I don't want to repeat that kind of scramble with a return to work. So we've started talking and thinking about how are we going to return to in-person services and have people back in our offices and our programming sites. The other thing I think that's really important is to think about people's emotional reactions to coming back to work and to the continued threat of the virus. Some people will be totally okay with it and just roll with it, and some will have a lot of anxiety. And so how do we build in some reassurance, and how do we build in just an acknowledgement even that they're going through that? And if you're a customer-facing organization, if you interact with customers on a regular basis, to also think through what are your customers' reactions to this, emotional reactions? How can you reassure them? How can you help them to process their emotions? Or customer or client, I guess, if you're a social service agency. And again, that's not often in our work plans. We don't often need to think about, how will people feel walking into the office for the first time. But I think because this is an infectious disease that won't be eradicated when we first start coming back to work, I think it's really important to think that through and to think through the supports that are needed.
So much to think about. I mean, human resources is now at a completely new level, especially as we're thinking about reopening the economy. So thank you so much to Laura from PwC, from Ryan from Peninsula HR, and Michael, thank you so much, from the BC Mental Health Association. Ladies and gentlemen, make it a great weekend. Spend some time with your family and make sure that we're all working together. The Surrey Board of Trade is here for you. Thank you again to the Port of Vancouver for your sponsorship of the Surrey Digital Town Hall Series.